November 24th, 1971, Portland, Oregon. It's the day before Thanksgiving. The airport is packed. Families dragging suitcases, kids half asleep on plastic chairs, the smell of bad coffee and jet fuel. Nobody's paying attention to the man standing alone at the Northwest Orient ticket counter. He's wearing a dark suit, a black tie. He carries a briefcase. He looks like 1,000 other businessmen passing through that airport on any given Wednesday. He pays cash for his ticket, one way, Portland to Seattle. He gives his name as Dan Cooper. Nobody will ever find out who he actually is. What happens next is one of the most audacious crimes in American history. A crime so perfectly executed, or maybe just so insanely lucky, that the FBI spent over 4 decades chasing a ghost. A crime that has never been solved. The only unsolved airplane hijacking in United States history. The man who called himself Dan Cooper didn't just hijack a plane, he jumped out of it, at night in a rainstorm, over the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, with $200,000 strapped to his body, and then he was gone. Flight 305 departs Portland at 2:50 p.m. It's a Boeing 727, short-haul flight, maybe 36 passengers on board. The plane is barely half full. Again, day before Thanksgiving, most people are already where they need to be, or they're driving. Dan Cooper takes his seat, 18C, an aisle seat near the back. He orders a bourbon and soda. He's calm, relaxed even. He lights a cigarette. About 15 minutes after takeoff, he presses the call button and hands a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner a note. She doesn't read it at first. She thinks it's his phone number. That happened a lot back then. Guys hitting on flight attendants by slipping them notes. She tucks it in her pocket. He leans over and says quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." She reads it. The note says he has a bomb in his briefcase. He wants $200,000 in negotiable American currency. He wants 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve. And he wants a fuel truck waiting in Seattle to refuel the plane. If these demands aren't met, he will detonate the bomb. Schaffner keeps her composure. She asks to see the bomb. He opens the briefcase slightly, just enough. She sees wires, red sticks, a battery. She closes it again and walks to the cockpit. The pilots radio Seattle. The FBI is notified, and the wheels of one of the strangest nights in American aviation history start turning. Here's what makes Cooper different from every other hijacker before or after him. He wasn't trying to go to Cuba. Half the hijackings of that era were people demanding flights to Cuba. He wasn't making a political statement. He wasn't deranged, at least not in any obvious way. He had a plan, a specific logistical plan. 4 parachutes, not 2. Not 1. 4 negotiable bills. A fuel truck. He wasn't improvising. He had thought this through. The FBI in Seattle starts scrambling. They get the cash together. $200,000 and $20 bills. Marked, but not obviously so. Serial numbers recorded. They photograph every single bill. They get the parachute. Meanwhile, Flight 305 is circling Seattle. For 2 hours, the plane just flies in circles over Puget Sound while negotiations happen on the ground. The passengers don't know what's going on. They're told there's a mechanical issue. They wait. Cooper sits in the back of the plane, smoking, sipping bourbon, politely chatting with the flight attendants. By all accounts, he was calm, courteous even. He told one flight attendant she should apply for a job with another airline because Northwest wasn't treating its staff well. He told another he wasn't going to hurt anyone. He seemed almost sorry for the inconvenience. At around 5:45 p.m., Flight 305 lands in Seattle. Cooper allows all the passengers and 2 of the 4 flight attendants to leave the plane. In exchange, he receives the ransom, $200,000 in a canvas bag, and the 4 parachutes. He examines the money. He examines the parachute. He seems satisfied. Then he gives the pilots new instruction. He wants to fly to Mexico City, but not at altitude, no higher than 10,000 feet, and no faster than 150 knots, with the landing gear down. The pilots push back. The fuel, the speed, the altitude. Flying like that burns fuel at an insane rate. Mexico City isn't possible in one jump. Cooper agrees to a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. The plane takes off from Seattle at 7:40 p.m., heading south into a storm. Here's where things get strange. At some point between 8 and 8:30 p.m., while the plane is somewhere over the forests of southwest Washington state, Dan Cooper does something that no one in the history of commercial aviation had ever done before. He opens the rear staircase of the Boeing 727. This is something specific to the 727. Unlike most commercial jets, the 727 has a set of stairs that extend downward from the rear of the plane, the aft air stair. It was designed for airports without jetways, so passengers could board and deplane from the back. Nobody had ever opened one in flight before. The pilots feel a pressure change. There's an alarm. A flight attendant named Tina Mucklow, who had stayed on board at Cooper's request, is sitting in a seat up near the cockpit. She reports that around 8 p.m., Cooper ties the money bag around his waist, puts on one of the parachutes, not the emergency chute, the main one, and tells her to stay where she is and not come back. She stays put, and Dan Cooper, whoever he is, steps off the back of a moving airplane, 10,000 feet above the dark forests of the Pacific Northwest, in the middle of a rainstorm, in the dark. When the plane lands in Reno at 10:15 p.m., Cooper is gone. The FBI launches the largest manhunt in its history up to that point. They call it NORJAC, Northwest Hijacking. Hundreds of agents, thousands of interviews. The forests of southwest Washington and northwest Oregon are searched for years. Military aircraft fly over the suspected jump zone. Nothing. No parachute, no body. No trace of Dan Cooper. Except for one thing. In 1980, 9 years later, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram is camping with his family on the banks of the Columbia River, about 40 miles northeast of Portland. He's digging in the sand near the shoreline when he finds something. 3 packets of cash, rotted, disintegrating, held together barely by rubber bands that crumble at the touch. But the serial numbers are still legible. They match the Cooper ransom, $5,000 to $800, roughly 3 bundles. The bills were not buried there. They weren't hidden. The FBI analysis concludes they had floated there, likely from the Washougal River, and were deposited during a flood event. The bills showed signs of being in the water for a long time. That's it. That is the only physical evidence ever recovered. $5,800 out of $200,000, sitting in the mud on a riverbank for 9 years. So who was he? That question has eaten alive hundreds of investigators, amateur sleuths, armchair detectives, and professional analysts for over 50 years. The FBI officially names the suspect D.B. Cooper, a journalistic error that stuck when a reporter mixed up 2 suspects early in the investigation, but the name became permanent in popular culture. Physically, the composite sketch, drawn from descriptions by the flight crew, shows a white male around 45 to 50 years old, around 5 feet 10 inches to 6 feet tall, dark complexion, dark hair, combed back, brown eyes, well-dressed, lean. He wore aviator-style sunglasses. He spoke without an accent. He was composed. He knew things. And here's where investigators kept circling back. Cooper knew things a regular person wouldn't know. He knew about the 727's aft air stair. He knew how to use a parachute. You don't just strap one on and jump, especially not at night in a storm. He knew to demand 2 main chutes and 2 reserves, possibly as a safeguard against being given a deliberately sabotaged parachute if he only asked for one. He knew the jump zone. He knew what 10,000 feet looked like on a pressure gauge. He had military experience, almost certainly. Parachuting at night, in rain, at speed, over rugged terrain. That's not something you learn from a book. Some investigators believed he had knowledge of the Pacific Northwest specifically. The jump zone he engineered, somewhere over the forests between Seattle and Reno, would put a jumper down in one of the most remote, heavily wooded, geographically difficult landscapes in the country. Whether that was intentional planning or just dumb luck, nobody knows. Over the decades, over 1,000 suspects were formally investigated by the FBI. One of the most compelling was a man named Richard McCoy Jr. Just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, in April 1972, McCoy pulled off an almost identical crime. Same type of plane, same method, parachuted out, got away with $500,000. McCoy was caught 2 months later. He was a Vietnam veteran. He was a paratrooper. He had the skill set. He looked like the composite sketch. Early FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach was convinced Cooper and McCoy were the same person. The problem, McCoy had a solid alibi for the Cooper hijacking. Multiple witnesses placed him in Utah, and when investigators dug deeper, the behavioral profiles didn't fully match. Cooper was calm, almost genteel. McCoy was reckless. His 1972 hijacking was sloppier, different person, same inspiration. McCoy was killed in a shootout with FBI agents in 1974 while escaping from federal prison. Another serious suspect, L.D. Cooper, a man whose niece came forward in 2011 claiming her uncle was D.B. Cooper. She had a DNA sample. She had a story. The FBI tested it against DNA from a tie Cooper left behind on the plane. The results were inconclusive. The tie had degraded too much for a clean match. There was also a man named Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper, a Northwest Orient airline employee who knew the plane's systems, who died in 1994 and reportedly said on his deathbed that there was something I need to tell you. His brother is convinced he was Cooper. The FBI examined Christensen. He didn't match the physical description. He was too short, too slight, and he died a wealthy man with a modest estate, nowhere near the $200,000 Cooper supposedly carried into the woods. Then there's the survival question. Could anyone have survived that jump? The FBI and most investigators quietly concluded, probably not. The conditions were brutal. Temperatures at 10,000 feet that night were below freezing. The plane was doing 150 knots. That's 170 miles per hour. The rain was horizontal. The terrain below was heavily forested, no clearings, dark, disorienting. Parachuting in those conditions, at night, without knowing exactly where you are, without proper cold weather gear. Cooper was wearing a suit and dress shoes. The odds of surviving the landing, even if the chute deployed correctly, were not good. And then if he did survive the landing, he'd be in the middle of the Cascade Range or the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in late November, miles from any road, in a suit, with $200,000 he can't spend without being caught. The FBI officially concluded in their last public statement that Cooper most probably did not survive, most probably, but they never found a body. In the Pacific Northwest, a body in deep forest often isn't found for decades, if ever. And the money. The $5,800 found on the Columbia River shoreline in 1980. That's what makes everything complicated. Analysis of the bills shows they degraded in a way consistent with extended water exposure, possibly the Washougal River. If Cooper landed in or near the Washougal watershed, and the money washed downstream into the Columbia, that means he landed there. That means, conceivably, he died there, or was there. But it also means that only $5,800 of $200,000 ever showed up. Where's the rest? If the whole bag went into the river, more would have surfaced somewhere. The fact that nearly all of it never appeared is one of the most enduring mysteries within the mystery. In 2016, the FBI officially suspended active investigation of the case. After 45 years and over 1,000 suspects, they declared they were redirecting resources to other priorities. The case was never closed, it was suspended. The official position, unsolved. There's a reason this case doesn't let go of people. Part of it is the audacity, the sheer, brazen audacity of a man in a suit walking onto a plane and hijacking it with what might have been a fake bomb. The FBI never confirmed the device was real, and then leaping into the void and vanishing. It has the structure of a movie because in many ways it sounds impossible. Part of it is the competence. Cooper didn't panic. He didn't make mistakes that investigators could trace. He didn't leave fingerprints. He was careful. He didn't leave DNA. The tie, which he took off during the flight, yielded some partial male DNA, but nothing that ever matched a suspect definitively. He wore gloves or was just naturally cautious. Part of it is the money. $200,000 in 1971 is roughly $1.5 million today, and almost none of it was ever spent. If Cooper survived, he either buried it, died with it, or found a way to launder it so carefully that no trace was ever detected. Part of it is the era, 1971. Airport security barely existed. You could walk onto a plane with a briefcase containing a bomb, and nobody checked. The year after the Cooper hijacking, the US government implemented the first mandatory passenger screening at airports. Cooper, accidentally or not, changed the way every person in America boards a plane. But here's what I keep coming back to. The FBI interviewed every serious suspect. They ran DNA. They ran financial analysis. They tracked money. They had the serial numbers of every single bill and monitored banks and currency exchanges for years. Nothing, which means one of two things. Either Cooper died in those woods in November 1971 and his body, his parachute, and most of his money decomposed, or were buried or washed away over 50 years. Or, and this is the part that refuses to die, Cooper survived. He landed somewhere. He walked out. He drove away. He spent the next 20, 30, 40 years living an ordinary life somewhere in America. Maybe he spent the money slowly, carefully, in small amounts. Maybe he told no one. Maybe he died of old age with a secret that will never surface. The FBI's own profilers have said they believe Cooper had a specific destination in mind when he jumped. He wasn't just leaping blindly into the dark. The speed, the altitude, the heading. Someone with parachute experience and knowledge of the terrain could have planned a landing zone. If he planned the landing zone, he planned the exit. If he planned the exit, there was someone waiting. A car, a road, a way out of the forest. There's a town called Ariel, Washington. Population a few hundred. It sits on the edge of Lake Merwin, right in the suspected jump zone. Every year, on the anniversary of the hijacking, people gather at a local tavern called Ariel Store and Tavern to drink to Dan Cooper. Some of them are true crime enthusiasts. Some are locals who grew up with the story like it was folklore. Some of them, and this is the part that stays with you, are old men who don't say much and drink alone. Nobody knows who Dan Cooper was. Nobody knows if he's alive or dead. Nobody knows where the money went. What we know is this. On November 24th, 1971, a man walked onto a plane, conducted himself with precision and calm, and then stepped off the back of it into a dark and rainy sky. And somewhere between that moment and this one, he became the only person in US history to commit air piracy and never be identified, never be captured, never be charged, just gone. The FBI has one open request on the Norjack case file. If you have information, contact them. The case is technically still open, technically still being watched. Agents who have retired from the Bureau still get calls about it. Books get published. Documentaries get made. New suspects emerge every few years, pushed forward by families who think they recognize the face in the composite. None of it has ever cracked the case. If Cooper is alive today, he's in his 90s. If he's dead, he took his secret with him. And if there's a version of this story where he landed safely, walked out of those woods, and lived out his days somewhere quiet, then somewhere, possibly, there's a man who pulled off the perfect crime, not a violent one. not a murderous one. A calculated, meticulous, borderline insane act of precision that cost an airline $200,000 and gave America one of its most enduring unsolved mysteries. Some crimes fade with time. Some victims get justice eventually. Some cold cases crack after decades with a new piece of evidence or a confession from a hospital bed. This one hasn't. And with every year that passes, the chances grow smaller that it ever will. D.B. Cooper walked onto a plane in Portland, Oregon on November 24th, 1971. He was never found. He was never identified, and he has never been forgotten.